Good. It's a thrill to be here. It's a pleasure to be here. It's like entering Penn State Valhalla. I see so many friends, colleagues. It's just wonderful to be among you. Thank you for coming out today. And what I want to do is take you back in time, a long time, back into the early part of the 19th century. On the screen, you see a copy of the book cover, and to the right of that, you see a paper. I'm the second Penn Stater to write about Frederick Watts in 90 years. The first was the man who presented this paper to the Cumberland County Historical Society. That was Professor Thornton Osmond. Professor of physics, came to Penn State in 1879, and as a retiree, he wrote this article, which was presented to the Historical Society 3 counties to our south. So, let's get going. Let's start our story in the 21st century. So you're traveling to Harrisburg on 322 South, and you see this sign as you approach Amity Hall and Clark's Ferry. Watts. I always wondered, what the heck is that about? Watts excellent. Well, what it's about is this. That's where the whole story starts, because Frederick Watts's grandfather emigrated from Wales in 1760, bought a huge tract of land at the confluence of the Juniata and Susquehanna rivers. And that's where Frederick Watts's father, David, was born in 1764. So what you see now is a contemporary map of Perry County, Pennsylvania. On the eastern edge is the Susquehanna River. And the Watts, I always thought it was a town. I took the exit once and kept looking for the town of Watts. Well, when you get there, there's no there. There is no town of Watts. There is a township, which is named for Frederick Watts's father, David Watts. And that came about in 1850, when it was named for David Watts. But moving right along, the geographical center of our story is Cumberland County, Pennsylvania. And as you can see, actually this was a county founded, carved out, incorporated in 1750. Okay? This is the second county founded in Pennsylvania, west of the Susquehanna. And at that time, Cumberland County encompassed the whole of Pennsylvania to the west and north. So, let's start very briefly with David Watts, for whom Watts Township. Now, when you go down and see that sign, you'll know that it was named for David Watts. He was a member of Dickinson College's first graduating class. He served as a trustee of Dickinson College for many years. He was a lawyer, a very good lawyer, but a very violent and unpredictable temperament, a force of nature. So, our Frederick, enters Dickinson College in 1815. But the following year, it shuts down for 5 years. Dickinson had a fairly rough beginning. Frederick never graduated, but he was always considered to be a member of the class of 1819. That's the year his father, David, died. And so Frederick leaves Carlisle for Erie to read law at the feet of his uncle, whom you see pictured here, William Miles. Miles. It's a big name around these parts. Miles was also a man of many talents, a farmer, a developer, a miller, a lawyer, you name it, he did it. Now at this farm, while he was reading law, Frederick, who was a townie, he didn't come from an agricultural background, but he fell in love with agriculture. And it became his greatest interest in life. So after 2 years, he returns to Carlisle, sets up a law practice, reads law again, passes the bar, and establishes a very large and lucrative practice very quickly. He's a very smart man. Large intellect, sterling integrity, unblemished honor, so on and so forth. On top of his law practice, he's also a reporter for the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. So very busy, very active in the law. Politically, he's a Whig. The Whig is the great national party, if you will, favoring a strong national banking system, protective tariffs, and especially the development of infrastructure to move the country forward, including public education. He's also named for a short period of time as a district judge. The picture that I just showed you is on display at this place, which is the Pfeiffer Memorial Arboretum and Nature Preserve in New Cumberland, Pennsylvania. And beside the artwork of Frederick is that of his wife, Henrietta Eage, painted about 1835. So he's back in Carlisle. He marries his first wife, 3 daughters. She dies after 5 years. But they built this house that you see here, which is still lived in and handsomely maintained by a professor emeritus at Dickinson College. He also built his first barn, which you see here. It's still in use from about 1830. It's still part of a working farm. But it had an innovation. You notice there's no cupola, no lightning rod. This is Watts' innovation. Typically, barns had a cupola to vent hot rising air, which also proved to be a conductor of electricity and lightning strikes. So what Watts did was instead, he cut vents along the eaves of the roof to diffuse the hot air more generally. Frederick Watts, lifelong designer of barns and farms, trying to create the most efficient operations possible. Frederick Watts also serves as a secretary to Dickinson College. I won't bore you with the details, but Dickinson is in turmoil from about 1815 to about 1833. It transfers among 2 denominations. It was originally Presbyterian. It wound up being Methodist, which it was to fairly recently. Watts helps to engineer that transfer to the Methodist denomination. And he also proposes a curriculum because the institution was starving for students. And his proposal was to make the curriculum less classical, less literary, and more practical. He also manages to serve as president of the Cumberland Valley Railroad. This is a line that goes from Harrisburg to Carlisle originally, but then goes down the Cumberland Valley all the way to Hagerstown, Maryland. It's one of the first and early successful examples of an American railroad company. And he was a very successful president of that. It was eventually acquired by the Pennsylvania Railroad in 1859, but when they kept Watts on to run it as president. He achieved a lot. I won't bore you with all the details, but what fascinates me is this bridge across the Susquehanna River. This is the second bridge that Watts built for the Cumberland Valley Railroad. The first one burned. This is the second one. And it's a 2-tier bridge, as you can see, with the locomotive and train running on the top tier, and underneath was the passageway for pedestrians and wagons. So a very innovative man and very successful with the railroad. But again, his greatest interest in life is agriculture, and he becomes a gentleman farmer. America is filled with gentleman farmers. This is the elite. These are patricians mainly. They're lawyers, they're men, and they're merchants, but people with an abiding interest in improving American agriculture. So Watts buys another farm adjacent to Creekside. And you can see on the left, the barn design. That's an incredibly creative and beautiful aesthetic. And it's just an example of Watts' creativity. On the right, you see an aerial view of his model farm that he designed and built, owned it for 10 years, and then sold it. But it was in existence up to about 25 years ago. And it's now demolished. There's a historical marker there, but it's now part of a big industrial park. Watts is an agricultural innovator. He introduces Mediterranean wheat to Pennsylvania, 1839. What's that about? Pennsylvania, as you won't recall, but you may, was the breadbasket of the Revolution, the granary of the American Republic, the biggest agricultural state on this continent for a period of time, until about 1840. However, a predatory invasive insect, the Hessian fly, began to decimate the crops. And what Watts did was to import a new variety from Italy and introduce it. And the genius of this was that the wheat matured before the Hessian fly could hatch. And so it saved the day for Pennsylvania agriculture. And this fabulous contribution, Watts introduces the McCormick Reaper to Pennsylvania. The Reaper revolutionized American agriculture. Not overnight, it took some time. But Watts, as best I could tell, either bought the first or second McCormick Reaper ever sold in America. And to introduce it to the Cumberland County constituency, he staged a grand exhibition on his farm at Creekside. And not knowing exactly how this thing was to work, it's horse-drawn, they had a person following the Reaper and trying to rake what it was spitting off. The poor guy couldn't keep up with it, so it was tried again. The crowd is laughing. They expected a disaster. They called this whole demonstration Watts's Folly. Well, on the third try, a well-dressed gentleman, as you see here, stepped onto the Reaper's platform and raked the wheat off with great ease. It worked. Well, the guy who stepped out of the crowd was none other than Cyrus McCormick himself. So, wow, what a surprise. Well, that's Watts's first act. He's 50 years old now, born in 1801. So we have that behind us now, and now we're going to turn to his second act as an agricultural leader. I wonder if any of you recall the name Stevenson Fletcher, who at one time was Dean of Agriculture at Penn State until his retirement in the mid-40s, I believe. Well, in retirement, Dr. Fletcher wrote two monumental histories called Pennsylvania Agriculture and Country Life, published by the Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission. A tremendous resource, really well done. And Dr. Fletcher said from 1850 until 1880, Frederick Watts was by far the most outstanding figure in Pennsylvania agriculture. In earlier decades, some folks referred to Watts as the father of the Pennsylvania State College. I'm not so sure that's an appropriate term, but I would say he was certainly the prime mover, with many compatriots, in getting the Farmers High School organized, built, and with Evan Pugh into successful operation. Now, if you talk about our lineage, I would argue that Penn State's lineage actually goes back to 1785 with the creation of the Philadelphia Society for Promoting Agriculture. Again, an organization of elites, patricians. You can see here, signers of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, Revolutionary War officers, so on and so forth. Washington and Franklin are members. So, in 1850, the Philadelphia Society for Promoting Agriculture calls for the founding of a long overdue state agricultural society. Now, some of these societies were up and running in neighboring states, in New York, in Ohio, in Maryland in recent years, but not in Pennsylvania. And the Philadelphia Society points the finger at farmers, Pennsylvania farmers, calls them lethargic. Why aren't you moving in this direction? And it points another finger at the state legislature for being so penurious, so stingy with resources, so unable to generate financing to get a society such as this off the ground. You can see what the society says. It is a cause of regret that Pennsylvania, essentially agricultural, cannot yet boast a state institution to be made available in diffusing a general knowledge of improved systems of husbandry and tillage, and imparting energy and vigor to the most important of all their industrial pursuits. Now keep in mind, you're talking the middle of the 19th century. America is, even though the Industrial Revolution is underway, it's still overwhelmingly agricultural. About 85% of the population is rural, most of it engaged in farming. So agriculture is by far and away the largest constituency, but also the quietest. And the Philadelphia Society is trying to shake things up and get things moving. So what happens is, a couple of months later, in early 1851, the Pennsylvania State Agriculturalist Society is founded. Frederick Watts is elected president. And his goal, his overarching goal, is to elevate the political, economic, and social standing of Pennsylvania's farmers. How do you do this? Well, you begin state fairs, large state fairs, for farmers so that they can display their best products and discuss improvements. And he's also encouraging the founding of county agricultural societies as part of the state agricultural society. And the second goal is to found an agricultural college based on scientific agriculture, which is an up-and-coming movement in this country, to serve a statewide constituency. Under Watts, the State Agricultural Society becomes an overnight success. First state fair in Harrisburg, 1851, 20,000. 3 years later, in 1854, they're in Philadelphia, 200,000 people in attendance. Membership grows from 2,000 to 8,000. It quadruples. And in just 3 years, the Pennsylvania State Agricultural Society is rising to the ranks of the very best, if not the best, state society of its kind in America. Watts very successful in moving this organization forward, again, with a lot of compatriots. They also moved to quickly establish the Farmers' High School of Pennsylvania. So in January 1853, this is 2 years after the society was founded, there's a committee that drafts a resolution calling for a statewide convention. The statewide convention occurs in March of 1853. Delegates assemble, and Watts drafts the report, noting that agriculture is now a progressive art and rapidly assuming the form and condition of a science. So despite the name, Farmers High School, the school is to always be of collegiate grade, granting baccalaureate degrees, but the name is chosen to assuage farmers who are somewhat put off by the word college, which to them conjures a place where gentlemen go, idle gentlemen, to study literary pursuits and develop a disdain for manual labor. So that's why it was called a high school, even though it's of collegiate grade. Manual labor would be required of students, and the school needs to be accessible to markets, but not near a large city or town. No den of iniquity would be the source for this place. So you want to keep these young farm boys away from the temptations of city life. So Watts drafts the bill and outlines the plan for the Farmers' High School. And in 1853, things are moving really quickly. However, the bill is introduced too late in the legislative session to pass. So it's interesting to see what Watts is saying, what this will cost. The total startup cost to get it capitalized is $38,000, including a $20,000 state appropriation, and an annual operating cost of about $16,000, including $6,000 for faculty salaries. A lot of money for the time. So actually, the Farmers' High School was chartered twice. In 1854, the bill passes the legislature, and Governor Bigler at the time signs it into law. But there are two changes in the bill as it is passed and signed. There's no state appropriation, and there are too many trustees to be managed. They called for 65 trustees, 60 plus trustees. Now, you know what roads are like in Pennsylvania in 2022. Imagine what they were like in 1854. How do you ever get them together? You can't. So Watts and his colleagues called for the legislature to issue a new charter with a state appropriation and with tuition set at about $75 per student. The new charter passes and is signed into law by Governor James Pollock. Now that's a name that should be familiar to every Penn Stater. Pollock residence area, Pollock Road, so on and so forth. Bidler before him. So the new charter is signed February 22nd, 1855, but there's still no state appropriation. And the one change that is made is now there are only 13 trustees. The governor, the secretary of the Commonwealth, the president of the Pennsylvania State Agricultural Society, and the principal of the Farmers High School. And then 9 appointed trustees, each to a 3-year term on a rotating basis. And the genius of this is that from the start, this was to be a statewide organization and a public organization, a public institution of higher learning. And you can see the wide geographical distribution of these trustees. Every corner of the Commonwealth. This is not a local or parochial institution, as so many of the existing liberal arts or literary institutions were at the time. So, wide representation. We are a statewide public institution from the start. So, very shortly after the charter is signed, bids begin to roll in. There's competition to site the school. Where are you going to put this place? And you can see here some of the proposals. Centre County, Erie County, Blair County. The guy at the bottom, Baker, Elias Baker. You've heard of the Baker Mansion in Altoona? Well, that is he. He was the prominent ironmaster of Blair County. From Franklin County, Huntington County, Perry County, Allegheny County, they're coming in. But General James Irvin, the ironmaster of Center Furnace, really wants it in Center County. He offers 200 acres of land, free and clear. He offers another 200 acres of land that can be rented. This is kind of a rent-to-purchase proposition, and eventually purchased. And he guarantees $10,000 that will be raised from the citizens of Huntington and Center County. Irvin says the Farmers High School would be especially beneficial into the particular district in which it shall be established, and I therefore desire its location to Center County. If we would add dignity to labor, if we would have it held in honor by the community, we must associate it with science. And if we would lessen the expense of acquiring scientific knowledge so as to bring the cost within the means of the farming community, we must connect its acquisition with manual labor. Irvin, the ironmaster of Center Furnace, not a man to be trifled with. One of the richest, wealthiest men in Pennsylvania, a major general of Pennsylvania militia, former congressman, unsuccessful candidate for governor of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, well connected. And so a team is put together from the Board of Trustees. And leading the site selection committee is the governor of the state, James Pollock. Now, can you imagine a current governor of Pennsylvania getting on the train and traveling to these sites to help establish where this school is going to be located? The first site visit, Center Furnace Mansion, June 26, 1855. So they inspect the lands, and then they were invited to a marvelous repast, a marvelous picnic, or whatever banquet, at the dwelling house of Moses Thompson of Center Furnace, where 150 persons were entertained by a sumptuous dinner prepared by Mrs. Thompson. The Center County Agricultural Society, presided over by George Bowl. The Bowl name is certainly familiar to everyone. Really put on the dog for this committee. And afterward, the committee goes to Erie County, Allegheny County, and Blair County. Some other bids come in. There's discussion about what to do. On September 12th, 1855, it's decision time. It's go time. where are we going to put this place, this school? So there's a lot of debate at this trustee meeting. There are motions for other sites. There are motions for Allegheny County, motions for Blair County. They're defeated. The original motion put on the table was that of Frederick Watts for Centre County, and it circles back, and finally the trustees accept Watts's original motion to site the school in Centre County. At the same meeting, Watts is elected president of the Board of Trustees. This is the beginning of a 19-year tenure as board president. Almost as soon as the site is selected, criticism starts to roll in. The place is in the middle of nowhere. There's no railroad connecting to it. But Watts defends it on the most essential advantages of soil, surface, exposure, healthfulness, and centrality. One of the geniuses of this is that it's in the middle of nowhere. That's what it's not associated with Philadelphia interests or Harrisburg interests, Philadelphia interests. It's a statewide institution, and it's in the middle of Pennsylvania. So geographically, it's a victory, or so they think. So work gets underway. 1856, we're off and running. William Waring is hired as the superintendent of farm and grounds. A Carlisle construction firm. Watts hires Turner and Natcher to construct the college building, as it's called, for $55,000. The building is designed by Hugh McAllister, a trustee from Bellefonte. But the first structure to go up is what you see here, the campus barn, designed by none other than Frederick Watts himself. It's a beautiful design, so it's completed in late 1856. It lasts till about 1889. It's moved to a part of campus and another part of campus, and it eventually catches fire and burns down. But it was originally built on the site of today's Carnegie Building. Construction continues apace. The west wing of the college building is now up 3 stories, so picture 3 stories. The legislature finally appropriates $25,000 with a promise of an additional $25,000 if the trustees can raise an equal sum. That's not going to happen. And the reason it's not going to happen is because of an economic depression that sets in full force beginning in September of 1857. This is the panic of 1857. The 19th century is roiled by economic depressions, 1819, 1837, 1857, 1873, 1893. This was a biggie. In fact, it was called the Great Depression all the way up until the Great Depression. All right, 1858. Things are beginning to grind to a halt. Turner and Natcher, the construction company, is bankrupt, nearly bankrupt. So work stops. Watts finds a new contractor to complete the west wing. Governor William Packer is now in place, and he attends a meeting of the trustees and pledges his support. It's amazing to me in my research how enthusiastic these 3 governors of Pennsylvania were, how strong the support was for getting this school up and running. Bigler, Pollock, and Packer. And now Watts says, wow, he is crowing. He's saying, our school is founded on a scale that will afford complete instruction equal to that of our leading colleges. For should not the education of farmers' sons be superior rather than less than equal to that of any other class? Well, here we are. February 16th, 1859, opening for instruction. 69 students, 4 faculty, no president, and a building 1/3 complete. But with lofty ambition, the Farmers High School opens its doors and goes to work. Watts says a new light is about to break on the agriculture community. And he might as well have been talking about, in terms of new light, Evan Pugh. He hires Evan Pugh. Pugh's 31 years old, first president of the Farmers High School. Pugh is a Pennsylvania native out of Chester County. He's a European-trained scientist, and he's absolutely brilliant. He does a nitrogen fixation experiment in England, which got him elected as a fellow of the London Chemical Society. One Penn State researcher said, if a similar experiment would have been conducted later, Pew would have won a Nobel Prize, which of course did not exist at the time. Pew has a very clear vision. Now here's a vision of what he wants to do: to develop upon the soil of Pennsylvania the best agricultural college in the world. Pew doesn't think small for the agricultural student of America. You all know Joe Paterno had his grand experiment. Evan Pew had what he called his great experiment. And wow, what he accomplished in such a short time is nothing short of amazing. He built the nation's first agricultural college on the highest scientific standards of the day. He secured the federal and state land grant designation for the college. He was also a national figure. He influenced the development of agricultural colleges, research stations, federal agencies, and policies to advance American agriculture. In fact, on 2 occasions, he was offered the post of chief chemist for the Department of Agriculture of the United States, but he turned it down because he wanted to develop this school as the national model. And he also wrote the first visionary plan for what an American land-grant college needed to be. Hugh McAllister, a big part of the leadership triumvirate of Penn State in those years: Watts, Pew, and McAllister. McAllister is the local trustee. He's in Bellefonte. He can get to campus quickly. And he's a law partner of James Beaver in Bellefonte. He is going to be a trustee from 1855 until his death in 1873. And he is, again, the designer of the college building, as it was called at the time. He's in constant communication with Pew. The early historian of Penn State said there was scarcely a day which did not have some task for the college which demanded his thought and counsel. Hugh McAllister, McAllister Hall, McAllister Parking Deck, McAllister Street. Pew's accomplishments: he graduates the first class with a degree, Bachelor of Scientific Agriculture. Underline scientific. That's the key. In America. He secures a second state appropriation of almost $50,000 to complete the college building. He builds enrollment for 88 in 1861 to 146 in 1864. This is the largest and best agricultural college in the United States. And it's no mean feat. He's doing this in the midst of the greatest crisis in American history. No mean feat. And last but not least, he secures the Morrill Land Grant College Act for the Agricultural College of Pennsylvania, which is what it now is called, no longer the Farmers High School, thanks to Pew. And he fights legislative attempts to take the land grant away in the following legislative session. The Morrill Land Grant Act. A lot of folks don't have a clear idea of what this is, but the concept is relatively simple. Basically, it's to form an endowment from the sale of federal land, public land, most of it in the Midwest and far West. Sell it off and use the proceeds to establish an endowment to support at least one college whose purpose would be, and you can see it here, without excluding science and classical studies. We're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, but including military tactics. It's the Civil War. The Union needs officers to teach such branches of learning as are related to agriculture and the mechanic arts, engineering. That's the salient twin forks of the Morrill Act: agriculture and engineering. But suddenly, disaster strikes. Evan Pew dies in April 1864. He's only 36 years old. It shocks the state and nation. The American Journal of Science and the Arts says the Agricultural College of Pennsylvania, the first institution of the kind established in this country, was attaining a high degree of success as a result of the rare combination of scientific and practical knowledge with administrative energy which characterized its lamented president. His death is a loss to Pennsylvania and the nation. What do you do? What do you do now? Well, Watts and McAllister had the great good sense to approach Evan Pugh's best friend and colleague, a gentleman named Samuel Johnson. Johnson is going to go on to become the foremost agricultural scientist in America. He's at Yale. He studied with Pugh at Leipzig back in the mid-1850s. But Samuel Johnson has a pretty good sense of what the job entails, because he and Pugh communicate frequently. And he knew how crushing the job was going to be. So he declines. So Watts spins quickly and falls back on someone he knows, a guy named William Allen. Allen Street Grill. William Allen is a distinguished educator. He was the retired president of Girard College in Philadelphia, and the former faculty member and acting president at Dickinson, which is where Watts knew him. So he calls on Allen, and Allen comes out of retirement reluctantly. He's classically trained and oriented. He's not a scientist. And this gentleman here in the lower left-hand corner, George Caldwell, who's been hired to teach chemistry at Penn State in Pugh's stead. And Caldwell was a compatriot and a fellow student in Germany with Pugh. And Caldwell is a brilliant chemist. But he says, whoa, he protests this. He says, a scientific man should be placed at the head of the institution, and you know as well as I how strong Dr. Pugh would have insisted upon this. So, already the seeds of a faculty rebellion are sown. So the William Allen presidency, I won't belabor this too much, but there are financial problems for the institution. It's in debt up to $50,000. And now the legislature is contesting the exclusive claim that Penn State has on the land grant designation. And a bill passes the legislature to dedicate 1/3 of the fund to Penn State, but to put the other 2/3 in the state treasury so that that could at some time be apportioned to other colleges. Wow. Meanwhile, there is a faculty rebellion being led by John Fraser, who's at the institution now as a professor of mathematics and astronomy. And basically, they're going to force Allen's resignation, which occurs in September 1866. Now, there was a plan of reorganization after Pugh died for general science, agriculture, and literature. But this plan will never really come to be operationalized for a couple of reasons. But Allen and his wife really never seemed to be at home here. You can imagine what the place was like. University House had been completed. That's where Allen and his wife incidentally, was Honora Curtin. She was the sister of the governor of Pennsylvania at the time, Andrew Curtin, our great Civil War governor. But they were used to the amenities of civilized life in Philadelphia, which we couldn't quite replicate. So they seemed dissatisfied with their life here, apparently regretting that they had moved in the first place. Meanwhile, Watts continues to push the legislature to shore up the agricultural college. He says, if you guys grant the entire land grant to us, not just 1/3, but all of it, we will establish 2 additional experimental and model farms in eastern Pennsylvania and western Pennsylvania. He asked the legislature to approve $80,000 in a bond issue to consolidate the debts. So the legislature denies the entire land grant fund, but it does authorize 1/3 of it, and it does approve the bond issue. Next up, John Fraser, on faculty as professor of mathematics and astronomy. So he assumes the presidency, and of the 5 presidents between Pugh and Atherton, Fraser is the one who has the best comprehension of what the Morrill Land Grant Act is supposed to do. And he wants to do a lot to get engineering finally underway at the institution. So he has a plan for reorganizing the faculty. He wants to grow it from 8 to 23. You're tripling the faculty. That's pretty ambitious. The trustees said yes, but only if the tuition revenue will support such an increase in faculty. Well, that's not going to happen. So, as I say, he does a lot to get engineering, civil engineering in particular, going. But Watts is still trying with the trustees to get the full appropriation, the full designation for the Moral Land Grant Act dedicated to Penn State. And so he does what I would call a Hail Mary pass. You all know what that is, using modern football parlance, and it scores a touchdown. Watts goes to the legislature with a petition. He said, we want all income from the Moral Act to be appropriated to the college. And if that doesn't happen, you guys, the state of Pennsylvania, you take over the college, you own its property, and you assume its debt. So this is it. It's a gamble. It's out in risk. Either we get it, make it happen, or you take it and do with it what you will. Well, it worked. And so in February of 1867, all land grant proceeds were dedicated to the Agricultural College of Pennsylvania. 1/10 of the funds, according to the Moral Act, could be used to establish experimental farms. The Moral Act expressly prohibited use of the funds for buildings and maintenance, except for the acquisition and construction of experimental farms. So finally, the logjam of land sales breaks up. The $780,000 allocated to Pennsylvania by the Moral Act generates by September of 1867 about $440,000, 56 cents an acre. End of the Fraser presidency. Well, it's coming to an end. Enrollment plummets. Only 30 undergraduates in residence by the fall of 1868. So his plan is not going to work. He's frustrated and he resigns. And he's out the door by the spring of 1868. The plan of reorganization has failed to attract students and has proved too expensive. Okay, the trustees now retrench. They slash the faculty in half. And now you start to see dissension arising from the Pennsylvania agricultural community, particularly in eastern Pennsylvania, especially in Chester County. The Aggies are dismayed. One says, I have been pained to learn that the college is not prospering. Governor Geary told me that there were not 30 students there this session, which further convinced me that the death of our worthy friend and the late talented Dr. Pugh was a public calamity. So, the institution is teetering. Next up, Thomas Burroughs. Burroughs Building, Burroughs Road. Burroughs is an esteemed and well-known educator in Pennsylvania and even nationally. He's the father of the common schools in Pennsylvania, the elementary schools. He created the bill that established state teachers' colleges. And his idea was, let's make agricultural practice predominant and let's diminish agricultural science. So basically, he wants to turn the place into a finishing school for farmers. And the scientific agriculture is going to be diminished greatly. The engineering disciplines, they're gone. The Aggies are up in arms over Burroughs. From Chester County, one says, you have no idea of the almost universal prejudice against the college among the farmers of eastern Pennsylvania. The appointment of Mr. Burroughs has furnished them with another occasion for attack, predicting that his administration will be a failure, as the college is practically dead past resurrection. Well, Burroughs does a few things. He introduces harvest home festivals to publicize the school. Enrollment does increase. It's back up to 75. That's half of what Pew had. The Alumni Association was founded. And in late 1870, he takes his students on a camping trip to Bear Meadows, overtaken by snow, people get sick. He contracts pneumonia and he dies a couple of months later, February 1871. The college is teetering even more. 3 troubled presidencies in 7 years, 3 failed curricular experiments. The experimental farms are struggling and incurring increased criticism. College is mired in debt. Needed enrollments have not materialized. The college is off track, way off track, as a developing land-grant institution. And Watts must bear major responsibility for pushing so hard for boroughs and supporting the new curriculum of practical rather than scientific agriculture. So, whom does Watts hire next? A minister? Are you kidding me? Pew would be rolling in his grave. But he hires James Calder, Calder Way. He's a college president of Hillsdale College, which is a pretty successful college, liberal arts institution in the state of Michigan. And he proposes 3 new curricula: agriculture, science, and classical. But classical literary studies are going to predominate. Agriculture is going to fade, fade, fade. Science is going to fade, fade, fade. C. Alfred Smith, who was Pew's protege, returns in 1877 to teach chemistry. And he said, I realized how completely the institution had become a mere literary college. But there are a few early achievements, aside from the curriculum shuffling, which angered the Aggies even more, and eventually the legislature. But women were admitted via trustee resolution in 1871. Rebecca Ewing and Ellen Cross were the first. Ewing Hall and Cross Halls in South Halls. By 1879, there are 49 women, although most of them are not in the collegiate ranks and in the preparatory ranks. And in 1872, the land grant endowment was increased by the legislature from $439,000 to an even $500,000, producing $30,000 a year in income. But now things are beginning to change. Watts is appointed Commissioner of Agriculture for the United States in 1871. He leaves for Washington, but he remains as trustee president in name for 3 years. McAllister is really the de facto president in Watts's absence. And James Beaver comes on board as a trustee in 1873. He's elected president of the board when Watts resigns in 1874. And now the descent into the abyss. Calder changes the name to the Pennsylvania State College in 1874. He eliminates tuition, big mistake, but increases spending. Undergraduate enrollments decline, with the preparatory ranks becoming predominant. You can see here by 79, 80, you have 58 college students, but 66 prep students. Calder ignores engineering, agriculture is downplayed, Penn State devolves into a backwoods classical college. Outside pressure multiplies. The state Grange recommends assuming supervisory control of the college. The Pennsylvania State Agricultural Society, which Watts served as founding president, demands that the college strengthen the agricultural curriculum and reorganize the experimental farms into research stations. The trustees and Calder prevail on the legislature, however, to bail them out financially to the tune of $80,000 in return for a faculty pay cut of 10%. That's the pound of flesh, and the faculty are not amused. The state legislature investigates in 1879 and concludes, while evidence does not show actual fraud or disclose corrupt management, the institution has been very badly managed. Okay, so here we are, almost on life support. Under Calder, Calder resigns in the winter of 1880. Finally, his successor is Joseph Shortledge Road, who's going to last about 9 months, an absolute disaster. But you can see what one faculty member tells James Beaver. After 22 years of experimenting, we are today the laughing stock of the state. So the trustees asked Professor Osmond, new to faculty, teaching physics, to form a committee to revise the curriculum such that it becomes consistent with the imperatives of the Moral Land Grant Act. And that happens, as you can see here. So 1880, 81, that's the past. 1881, 82, the new curriculum is in place. And as you can see, the report says, Osmond's report says that college has been distinctly differentiated from the other colleges of the state and correlated with the Land Grant Act of Congress of 1862. And then there's a legislative committee that comes along a couple of years later and says the state college is in good faith fulfilling the trusts committed to it by the state. We believe it has passed its worst days. Without belaboring it, the 1870s were a tough time for land-grant colleges nationally, not just here at Penn State. Jealousy is a big part of it. But I won't bore you with the details, but the presidents of Harvard and Princeton came out with strong condemnations of land-grant colleges. Congress launches an investigation, but absolves the colleges of any deficiencies. The National Grange investigates. The Grange becomes an enemy of land-grant colleges. It seems counterintuitive, but it's true. And it recommends the colleges be controlled exclusively by farmers. So who emerges? Who is the person, the point person who is going to navigate the very treacherous 1870s for land-grant colleges? It's George Atherton. And he's hired as Penn State's 7th president in 1882. And in 24 years, he brings the institution back to life, has some degree of prosperity, and sets it up for success in the 21st century. Frederick Watts, meanwhile, Commissioner of Agriculture for the United States, appointed by President Grant. He calls for a national convention of land-grant colleges in 1872, a couple of months after he's in office, and he wants to control the research agenda for all the colleges. He wants to be the clearinghouse and the arbiter of what research should be carried out by whom, in what states, so on and so forth. That agenda is rebuffed. College presidents, agricultural scientists, presidents of state agricultural societies are saying, no way, we don't want a central coordinating agency. So a big defeat for Watts, but he's successful on other fronts. He greatly expands the seed distribution program. That's one of the major priorities of the Department of Agriculture, especially to aid the recovering South and the growing West. And two major things come out of his administration. He establishes the microscopy division, which is able to start systematic study of plant diseases. And he lays the foundation for what becomes the U.S. Forestry Service by hiring the first U.S. forester. His crowning glory is the Centennial Exhibit of 1876, a very exciting time for America. 1876 is an incredible year in many ways, but there was a feeling that it's time to pull North and South together. It's time to have a national celebration, bring things back together. And so in Philadelphia's Fairmount Park, for 10 months, there is this great exhibition. Buildings are built, and agriculture is a huge part of it. And Watts is saying, the department has contributed largely to that exposition. Statistics, chemistry, botany, microscopy, and the seed division are all there to represent the prodigious progress which has been made in this country in the last 100 years. And that's his swan song. Watts retires to Creekside. He's Cumberland County's most eminent citizen, celebrated far and wide within the county. He dies in 1889 at age 88. His mind was clear, his faculties good. He was simply worn out and went quietly to sleep without an illness. We should all be so lucky. So his legacy: great legal career, Supreme Court reporter, rescued Dickinson College, built the Cumberland Valley Railroad into a great success, as an agricultural innovator, barn and farm design, introduced Mediterranean wheat and the McCormick Reaper, founding president of the Pennsylvania State Agricultural Society, his lever for raising the fortunes of the Pennsylvania farming class, founding president of the Farmers High School, board of trustees, prime mover in organizing and getting the school up and running and hiring Evan Pugh, and together they made this place the first successful agricultural college in America. And to the right, you see Watts Hall at Penn State. Watts Hall was built in 1923. It's going to celebrate its centennial next year. It is the first residence hall built in the West Halls area, and appropriately named for the founder. He led efforts to defend the school against legislative attempts to take the land grant fund away. His only blot is the rush to fill 4 presidential vacancies with men unsuited to leading a new scientific institution. And he also, he acquiesced to their wildly divergent curricular plans, which whipsawed the institution, and basically, over time, almost led it to the brink of extinction. As U.S. Commissioner of Agriculture, he had some success. He expanded the seed distribution program and made key contributions to its development as a scientific agency. And so that, in 45 minutes, is the story of Frederick Watts. Thank you. Yes.
Roger, presidents that last 9 months, unsuccessful, get major streets named after him. How come Watts only has a dorm?
Watts had nothing to do with that last appointment.
Yeah, but I'm saying, if he's so prominent in Penn State's history, why isn't his name more visible in this?
I don't know. It's almost been buried by history, but in previous years, the decades after the founding of this institution, he was well known. And he did get at least the residence hall named after him. But, as Stevens and Fletcher said, he was, for 30 years, the most prominent agriculturalist in the state. So he made his mark and made it well.
Other questions? Don't all talk at once.
Well, thank you all.
Oh, goodness, fantastic.
Thank you very much. If you want to read all about it, there are books for sale. They're 33% off, $30. You take it away with you, and I'll be happy to sign it if you prefer. So thank you for being here. And look, the sun is shining.
Yes.
That's a good omen.
We're now going to select 2 people to receive a vote. And I'm going to let Roger pull the name. His fault if you give it well.
I don't have my glasses. Did you see it?
You read it? 0628082. You got a vote. One more. Oh, this ticket number is 0628074. Okay. You guys both get a vote. Thanks for coming, folks. Fantastic. Wait a minute.
I'll be happy to.
Oh, they're out here. Okay, here are the books. Iris has them.
If you come to this table, I'll be happy to sign.
Come up to the table, please. Thanks for coming, folks. We'll try to get back to you for July. We're working on Shavers Creek as a possibility, as a trip, and we're going from there. So, is that
One other thing. If any of you are interested in membership in the Central County Historical Society, there are membership envelopes and applications over there. Just pick one up, send it in. We'd love to have you.
Thanks for coming, folks, and we'll try to get back together again in person, I hope. Thank you.